Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Murphy, publisher of the National Black Unity News. I have a very special young lady with me today that I want to introduce to you. She's a new editor in the National Black Unity News, but there's a lot to this young lady. She does quite a bit, but I'm gonna let her share her story, tell her story. But the things that she do is extremely powerful, useful, and before we go any further, I'm just going to let her talk a little bit about her. And so, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. This is Miss Sheila Brown. How you doing, Miss Brown?
I am wonderful, King. Thank you so much for that brilliant and sweet introduction.
And that's another thing. She know how to speak to people very well. She know how to lift you up too. You just heard that, and I didn't even pay her either. But look, um, I just met you recently, and I've been on a few calls with you
Mhm.
on several different types of networks. And I'm truly impressed with the things that you do. And I had several conversations with you.
Mhm.
But before we get into some of the things that you do, and because you do a variety of things, but I want people to know who you are. And so, can you explain to how was you brought up? What was your family life like, and how did you come to make decisions for your careers and everything else?
Thank you for the opportunity to share that insight. I consider myself a daughter of the Most High first, but I'm also a daughter of life's circumstances, and I'm a student of what in my humble, in my humble rendition of it, I'm a student in many ways of social issues, like almost like a sociologist, right? I've always been gifted with what my ninth grade or 10th grade English teacher at Blair High School said I had acuity of insight. I look very deeply and think very deeply about things that are happening internally, externally, at a micro or a macro level, they might say in economics. And I'm always processing information. And one of the central themes of my life, ever since I remember being a little girl and watching on a Sunday night in maybe January or February, the story about Dr. King that they used to show back in the 80s and 90s, right? And I remember being so deeply impacted by that it would linger with me throughout the night, and all these questions would be revolving around my head. Why did he die? Why were people so angry with him? What did he do that was so wrong? Why are people who have dark skin or black skin so hated? What would the world be like if he didn't die? Why did he care so much? And so those little questions were rotating in my mind as I would go to sleep, so heavy in my heart about that story. And that same intrigue and interest remained with me my whole life, up to the point where no matter what was going in my life, it seemed like life circumstances were bringing me very closely to the origins of history on the continent of Africa. And in many ways, I was being set up. My grandmother, who I would spend summers with, her house was filled with imagery of beautiful Black art, and her stories were laced with really powerful traditions of oratory and oral tradition and medicine and freedom, and her interesting nuanced encounters with civil rights, and her perspectives on things. And all of this was set up for an encounter that I would have in middle school, where I went to New York. My mom sent me to New York for a year to go to my ninth grade year, which was middle school there. And I encountered a woman who taught me African dance. So this is where the real journey for me starts to flower. This young lady wasn't just an African dancer, but she was in many ways a historian. And she started teaching me little things about culture and African history that also remained and resonated with me even when I went back to Maryland. And in my 10th grade year at Montgomery County Blair High School in Silver Spring, Maryland, on Wayne Avenue at the time, I quickly realized that there was a need to share what I had learned from her with the girls that were around me. And I founded and taught at Montgomery Blair High School the Sankofa African dancers. And that legacy still exists at Montgomery Blair High School to this day, although they do not acknowledge me as the founder, which could easily be resolved if they just open their hearts to the history. It's documented, I was a student for it. But what that did was it kind of set the tone for wherever that I would go. I would leave something that I learned behind, and it would proliferate and it would stay and it would stick. And so after high school, I got involved with what many people refer to as Black nationalism. I didn't know at the time it was Black nationalism. I knew I heard an answer to some questions that I was asking since I was a little girl about Dr. King, and no one seemed to be able to either hear the question or be interested in answering it in an intelligent way. And that suddenly changed when I encountered a man by the name of Dr. Malachi York, among other names. And so I got involved so deeply in his movement, and I abandoned my parents' desires and of being a full-time student at Howard University, and I threw myself into this movement because it so moved me with answers, and it seemed like the perfect solution to a global problem among African people. And so that process began the molding and the interpretation of events in my mind that would set the way and segue me for what I am doing today, which is my work as a divine life strategist, a purveyor of African culture, particularly focusing on some very powerful women, and as a health and wellness coach, as well as an author and a speaker, and even a strategic planner and an attorney. And so all of these events, everything that I did from my work at Montgomery Blair High School, introducing these beautiful cultural legacy of African dance, to which many of the girls who I introduced to are dancers to this day. And will, when they encounter me, are always reminding me of my role in their life, which is beautiful. Then 10 years with the Nuapia Nation, followed by 4 years of law school at one of the most important and should be honored as a prestigious law school for the African American lawyer, because like Howard University, they are largely responsible, if not second or first, in pumping out African American and African descended attorneys. And that's Thurgood Marshall School of Law, which ironically, he was not a proponent of because he was an integrationist. And Thurgood Marshall School of Law was set up to be anti-integration. It was one of the first segregated law schools in Texas. And it was designed for that purpose of not allowing African American students who wanted to become lawyers to go to Texas State or the University of Texas. And so I keep having these interesting encounters with powerful and profound people in history and contemporary leaders who are moving the world in very powerful ways and impacting my life and shaping my ideas and exposing me to things that I would never have before. And then I got involved in Georgia in the Georgia State Conference NAACP at a pivotal time in history where this question of, or this really reoccurring question of injustice, murder, and state-sponsored killings wholesale of Black men through, as personified through the trial and the struggle for the life of Troy Anthony Davis back in 2012, I believe that was, or 2011, when he was finally executed by the state of Georgia for a crime that arguably, and many believe, and even evidence support, that he did not commit. And so I was thrust into that, and I organized one of the most prolific and successful movements that the Georgia State Conference NAACP has had up to that point, and largely possibly till today, organizing people around this question of social and judicial injustice as perpetuated against Black men and women in the form of state-sponsored killings for crimes that arguably they didn't even commit. Mm-hmm. And the disproportionality surrounding the number of people who get executed and who never get pardoned or get a chance to really exercise justice. And so, although I was an attorney, I was not operating in that capacity on that matter. It was more of a political activism as the community coordination chair for the Georgia State Conference in NAACP. And then also at that time, something else really career shifting and profounding was happening in my life. I wanted to practice estate planning, but it seemed like that wasn't going to be happening. Instead, I kept getting thrust into all of these other areas. And one of them, ironically, was called strategic planning. And I was terrified of it at first, but as soon as I accepted the fact that I was going to have to do this, I understood how critical this line and train of thought is, and why so many of our movements and so many of our organizations fail because we lack this critical and essential organizational development skill in both our nonprofit entities, our social entities, our organizational and business entities, and more so in our personal lives. See, strategic planning, again, kept bringing me back to African life, African culture, and African history. And as I started to delve deeply into strategic planning, I realized that there was a portion in the process that kept bringing me back to the word Sankofa, which means go back and fetch it. And I said, man, this is really interesting, because the process that I was using to help, I was at the time working with behavioral health organizations, and I was going through this let's say, phasiology process, where it was like phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And in phase 1, I spent a lot of time doing data analysis, data collection, and data gathering. And I was doing it in sometimes very creative ways, and sometimes practical ways, sometimes very common ways. But what I kept thinking about is, my God, this is the principle that the Ghanaian people refer to through the Adinkra system as Sankofa. Sankofa just means data gathering and analysis. We oftentimes do the data gathering when we're gathering together to honor Black history, but we oftentimes fall short of the analysis, right? Okay, so.
Let me stop you right here for a moment. Because you said that key word, you mentioned you mentioned Black organizations, businesses, and things like that fail because they fail to do a certain thing or things. And and I'm more interested right now because it kind of piqued my interest when you said that. I know you was ready to get to it, but I just want you to elaborate on that, because, like I said, a lot of people listening, even myself, I'm curious, because that might be a critical mass that I'm missing as well, that can help move us along a little bit more efficiently. So can you elaborate on some of the things that most of our organizations fail to do to get us to where we want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I was thrust into this. I was fighting it the whole time, because I was like, I'm always having to learn new skills. Why can't I just use the skills that I have, Lord? I'm a lawyer. Why can't I just? But really, they all interplay. And so what I had learned to accept is that all of the things that I have experienced, all of the things that I have endured and that I have overcome and even conquered, are all a part of this powerful development of my life as someone who's seen our struggle in so many different angles and ways. And so I was hired to do a strategic plan for a behavioral health organization. So I'm behind the curve because I have to understand what strategic planning is, which is one of my strong points, understanding the inner workings of a system, right? But this one I wasn't prepared would make such a profound shift in my life, because what I realized is that what makes organizations successful is that the spirit of the person, because many businesses are considered people, they're persons in the eyes of our government.
Okay.
And when you think about that in a little bit more of a what I call trans-physical way, or even in a spiritual way, that means every entity that operates as a business or organization also possesses a spirit and a soul, right? It represents a stated mission, but it also represents an unstated mission, right? So when you hear the little jingles and the commercials and things, we are subconsciously being trained to identify that organization with a certain mission, a certain theme. We call it branding today, right?
Mm-hmm.
But branding is the external, it is the physical body of something internal. And the only way you get to the internal or the spirit of an organization is through a very strategic process where the leaders, the architects, the divine minds of the organization set the tone and set the expectations and set the direction for the company. Right. And this is oftentimes done by people you never encounter when you, let's say, run into your favorite fast food restaurant and you see the final end product. But what makes us more vulnerable is that we oftentimes buy into the end product and we don't do the necessary work to understand the spirit and the intellectual and drive behind the end product, right? And so I can go in 1,000 different directions, but I'm going to stay in terms of how strategic planning plays a role in why we are not as effective as we could be organizationally and what we need to do in order to shift that. Now, as a Pan-African Garveyite who studies the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's movement and the role that mother, his wife, and confidant and partner in freedom also played, was starting to see that, my goodness, the most powerful Black movement was laced with evidence that they were masters at strategic planning, meaning they had vision, they had a clear stated mission. They were organized around very clearly stated objectives, and they had goals, right? And they had tactics and strategies that they were using. So these are terms that strategic planner facilitators and strategic planning people who are really engaged in that type of work, these are the words that we look for. These are our buzzwords. These are industry terms that have very significant meaning and implications. And so part of the strategic planning processes, in a nutshell, is in African terms, is Sankofa, is looking at data, gathering the data, whether that be about a retail establishment or a nonprofit movement or a for-profit movement. The most precious resource for us is data. What has happened and what to do to interpret what that means in the organization. Sometimes that's in the form of sales. Sometimes that's in the form of donations. Sometimes these are called key performance indicators. How well are the strategies, tactics, and our objectives being met based off of these tangibles, right? And so when we have the data, once we have the data that we can begin to analyze, and sometimes that's from external sources like our stakeholders, and sometimes that's from internal sources like our employees. All of this is very high level, very board of director level information and processes. The people that you don't see, they're the ones who set the tone, right? So this is very important because we oftentimes in our community start with the end product as opposed to having the privilege and the resources to begin inception with what is it that we are trying to accomplish, organizing the people, the human capital, the financial capital, the material resources around that, the buildings, the assets. We oftentimes operate with the end and start working our way backwards, right? That has certainly been my experience in life.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see a product that I think will sell, and then I try it, I put it on the market, and then I realize, oh, I'm responsible to more than just my customer. I may have to deal with wholesalers, and then I have governmental agencies that want a piece of this pie, and then there are government regulators. And so it's a painful process stepping backwards. And then I
Mm-hmm.
realize, oh, I don't want a bookstore. I wanted to be someone who enjoyed talking to people and reading books. But when I opened a business, I was doing anything but that, right? So we kind of learn backwards. Whereas in an ideal world, we would look at a problem that we want to solve, perhaps, or see an issue or an opportunity in the market to bring value. And then we would go through a process from inception of thought, analyzing the feasibility of that and the way we want to do it. Is it something that there is a need for? Is there a market for it? What does this mean in terms of my personal? Because real strategic plan, remember I said it has a soul? A strategic plan really is the external personification of a person's soul, the
Mm-hmm.
organizer's soul, right? So when you see your work at Black Unity News, you have a theme that you're trying to do. It's the uplift of your people through art, through history, through business, through organizational development, right? So that's a recurring theme in your business. So with a strategic planner, if you had probably had the privilege of doing that, you might have looked. In other words, what a strategic planning is designed to do is to look at how you want the world to be and then start taking steps backwards until you're here with a thought and what needs to happen. And you put all of these things in place theoretically, and then you start applying the resources, and then you put the action plan in place. By the time the rest of the world sees what you're doing, they just see the burger, right? They see
Mm-hmm.
the da 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 da. But what happened prior to that is where the magic is. That's the heart and soul of strategic planning.
Okay. That's powerful, because like I say, we're a solution oriented type of publication. And so that's why it perked my ears when you said some of
Mhm.
the things, because we try to provide solutions. Now, you also mentioned that you're an attorney, and I want you to elaborate a little bit on that, and then I want you to get into a little bit about your book and your services with the book. And
Mhm.
last but not, because that's most important, how we going to survive? Something should happen, or
Mhm.
strategic planning, put it that way. But
Yeah.
yeah, but what took you into the legal? I know you mentioned that you got involved with so many things that kind of like a
Yeah.
wagon train, put in circles and stuff like that. But
It,
like
it,
it's like you all like, to me from the outside looking in, it's like you was preordained to do certain things that
mm,
God had put something into you that make all types of circumstances led into this
mhm,
will
mhm.
within a will, so to speak.
Yeah, it was kind of like a whirlwind, so to speak, of circumstances that kind of laid out in this particular order in order for me to gain some insights and some skills in the process. So when I ended up leaving or feeling like I was being pushed out of the Nubian Nation with Dr. Malachi York, having had a bookstore for 10 years and fully enthralled, engrossed in that movement, body, mind, and spirit, the question was, what was next? And part of the answer for that for me was, and I usually don't talk about this, but I was also very concerned about my own legal future, my legal status in this, world, because there were indications that the attacks legally that were taking place against Dr. Malachi York in the land in Georgia were shifting very slowly but quite aggressively towards those of us who were so attached financially in many ways. And so I was seeing indices that I might find myself in a defensive posture in court one day for unrelated but very related charges. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was concerned about that. And I was also recognizing that the resources that were being expended to the beloved master teacher, Dr. Malachi York, were not going to be extended to me should I need them, right? So then that raised the question, if I can't afford a defense and the defense that I need won't be afforded to me, I need to know some things. And so then this issue of, well, maybe I should, arm myself with knowledge. And, I never forget, I was at Strayer University one day and we were having a class on personal finance. And for some reason, the professor asked this profound question: what is it that you actually want to do when you finish here? And people were going around answering the question. And ironically, there was an African girl right next to me. And she said, I want to go to law school. I want to be a lawyer. And I don't know if you ever see those Spike Lee movies where like one of the characters, like Denzel, he would just have this epiphany and then the world starts spinning around him. It's a real phenomenon. I literally left the room and all of a sudden, like in my head, things just started spinning around. And it was like I was being reminded, oh my God, before all of this, I was supposed to go to law school. And then it was ironic because I just knew it in my soul. Like I initiated the process. I started doing whatever steps I needed to do. And it's so ironic that even among all those difficult circumstances, I ended up getting into law school. But what was the final nail in the coffin? You talk about divine providence. I had somehow, since high school, even when it was like 10 years before that, and another probably 15 years after that, I had somehow kept this little letter about when you graduate from high school, they had this process back then with the letters of recommendation. You could not open them. But somehow my English professor had approached me and she said, Sheila, I really want to write a letter of recommendation for you. Can I do that? And I was like, yeah. I mean, I didn't know better. I didn't have any training on why that was important. But I ended up getting this extra copy and I was so terrified of opening it. Even as an adult, I never opened it. That's how they were like, do not open your letters of recommendation. So one day I was gathering all the resources to apply for law school, and this letter, kind of fell out of a photo album, and I was still trembling about opening it. It was so funny. So I opened the letter, and I started to read, and like literally tears fall down my eyes because my English teacher, Mrs. Cannon, who was so vested in me. She was the one who said I was the girl who had an acuity of insight. But this was the opening. She said, Sheila Brown is a phenomenal young lady who loves African culture and who aspires to be an public interest attorney who advocates on behalf of women and children. And I said, oh my God, I remember that. And it was the final clue that this was where I was supposed to be going. Needless to say, I ended up graduating from Texas Southern University, Thurgood Marshall School of Law 3 years later with a top 25% of my class and the desire to take something and do something with it. Now, it's arguable whether I have met that goal or not. But what is indisputable is that the skill set that I have acquired over the years from being in business with Dr. Malachi York, a student of that doctrine who was a master of insight in himself and kind of having developed a mentality around analyzing things very deeply within that, but with the added benefit of having an African perspective, right? And then going to law school and really going through this engine churning process of taking a concept to all the way to conclusion. We had this grueling process of question, analysis, conclusion, right? Now that was drilled in my mind. And then I go from there to being forced to think about the whole process, that a inception to end goal of a business as a strategic planner. And then it all kind of comes to a head when I'm back in Maryland. I hadn't been away for almost 10 years and I'm dealing with health issues. I'm not satisfied with my life. And I find myself, almost 300 pounds. Well, I was over 300 pounds. I still can't even admit that. But I was over 300 pounds, and I was lost all of my desire for life. I had all these skills and nothing was coming together for me. I was just barely making enough energy in my own spirit, mind,
Mhm.
and body to get up out of the bed and go to work and, retreat. Life had beat me down so badly at this point, and there didn't seem like there was very much for me to live for. But I was chugging through, and then one day
Mhm.
I had this epiphany that, are you going to do this? Or are you not? Are you in or are you out? Because if you want to be in, you're not going to be able to do this and sustain yourself in this way. You are going to have to do battle with yourself around this unhealthy relationship you have with food. I accepted the challenge, and 17 months from that date, I had dropped 135 pounds naturally
Wow.
just by switching to a vegan diet, incorporating juicing, walking and exercising, and making a massive mindset shift about how I
Mm.
wanted to be in the world. So out of that came my first book, The Divinity Soup, an ancestor-inspired recipe starring collard greens. Everything kept coming back to African culture and African history, but it all started to make sense. I was being thrust through a series of schools, as Dr. Malachi York would have called it, like the school of religion, the school of economics, the school of spirituality, the school of self-control, the school of lack, the school of abundance, the school of racism, the school of Garveyism, right? I was being introduced to all of these schools so that I can come together right now to produce this
Amen.
and to start teaching what I refer to, or what Dr. King referred to as, the really ancient mystic science of transphysics that couples the urgent phenomena that has existed from ancient humanity all the way up to today, the struggle for freedom and for health. I was immersed from the time I stepped out of my parents' homes in a struggle for both, and I didn't know it until I had completed this book and I realized I wasn't alone, that this epic journey for freedom of health is what we're all about, and the tools that we need to overcome it are accessible to us as they've been accessible to our ancestors. They evolve around four fundamentals of life. We refer to them as the four elements, plus one, divine intention. And that
Mm.
when we strategically use these things for the noble and righteous cause of freedom and health, we can conquer not only our enemies, but any obstacle that stands in our way.
Wow. You know, I don't know how to classify myself, but I do know that for some reasons I always had this battle within. I used to look outside, but outside almost destroyed me, because I never
Mhm.
measured up to this and what other people ideas and thoughts was success or failure and all of this. And I start looking within, and that was a lot. That was some serious issues within. Why this, why, what for, how come? I'm so inquisitive about it, and so I always question myself. And then I guess you question yourself long enough, you search long enough, you'll find answers.
Mhm.
And so now that I know who I am, what I'm capable of doing, there's really no limitation to me. I am,
Mhm.
the power that's within is so powerful. But at the same time, I've been blessed with meeting people like you.
Yeah.
Seriously, I've met so many people who are doing so many great and wonderful things that's altering people's lives. Not only did they alter their own lives, but altering other people's lives at the same time. And I see, because that's why I'll be so curious about your journey.
Mhm.
How do you get here?
Yeah.
And there's many roads that people have to take internally to get to where they are. They have to
Mhm.
overcome many battles, obstacles, whatever you want to call it sometimes. And it's all within, sometimes we look out there and everything else for all the wrong answers sometimes. But
Mhm.
when I hear you speak and I did a little research on you and your journey it's amazing in its own right because you had to take the journey. Nobody else could take it for you. You had to go through this yourself. But the amazing thing is because you went through this journey, you found some answers. You was enlightened to a lot of things,
Mhm.
and you didn't keep it to yourself because you understood that it was to share, to
Mhm.
enlighten others. And that's exactly what you're doing now, and I commend you for that.
Thank you.
But I was on a seminar or a workshop that you are formulating.
Mhm.
And I want you to explain a little bit because you mentioned the book and everything a little bit about it. So we're gonna tell people to get this book because when they finish listening to what you have to say. But there was something just last week kind
Mhm.
of blew my mind that you just took me way from where I thought you were over here to way over here. And it's connected, but I didn't expect that. But can you elaborate a little bit on that part so you could explain it better than I can?
Yeah, King. And when you said that the point of this session that we're doing today is to introduce me to people, and I was like, oh, I don't like talking about me. I'm not important. Let's just get to the book, right? So I couldn't see the wisdom in what you were doing, but in order for people to understand what my three giftings are that I'm trying to offer before I leave this planet, the gift of trans physics as taught to us by Dr. King, possibly the gift of health and wellness from the perspective of our ancestors that I do through my work at Sheila Brown Speaks, opening the hearts of our daughters and even our sons to what I call divine health through divine self-care and managing that relationship. And then there's this other prong of my experience that I didn't touch on, but is still very much connected to story. And that has to do with poverty, with unemployment, with racism, with life's unexpected circumstances like personal crises, with national emergencies and disasters, and how all of these things can culminate to make the life of a single mother of African descent, or even a single father of African descent in these very challenging times, um, very, very difficult, right? And so remember, all of these things were happening, and I was moving through these whirlwinds, as you say, through life, trying to figure out, how to make it, just how to make it. Like the first 20 years after high school was just, oh my God, it was like survival mode, like survival, just make it, food to eat, water to drink, shelter over the head. That seemed like the theme of my life. And I was just completely oblivious to that life was really relatively easy for other people, but I didn't seem to participate that. And it was almost so bad one time, I actually thought I was accursed. I was just like, no, this
Mm-hmm,
ain't normal, right?
mm-hmm,
So I found myself in Georgia, and I had this little stint where things were doing really good. I was employed, gainfully employed, I was making moves, and then all of a sudden it came to a complete halt. And I couldn't understand why. With circumstances beyond my control, but there was plenty of
mm-hmm.
work to do in Georgia. I was literally a licensed attorney in good standing, but it was this culmination, this reminder, and I feel like that reminder was on purpose now, that you're vulnerable, that at any given point, you can find yourself at the mercy of someone who doesn't like you, whether that's based off
Mm.
of personal vendetta or based off of racism or a combination of all of them. And that your happy-go-lucky, circumstantial resources and abundance, it can all come to a complete halt by means that you have no control over. And that is exactly what happened. I was completely had the carpet pulled from under me. And then I just couldn't understand why. But I knew that I had what it took. I mean, I wasn't just going to sit back and get, put out and have my child, on, not that being on welfare is a bad thing, but I didn't want to be in that position
Right.
where I was dependent upon, someone for food, clothing, and shelter to that degree. And so I did the only logical thing that I could do. I started applying for jobs outside of Georgia. It seemed like Georgia had closed the window of every job. Like nobody was giving me a job. And the bills were piling up. And I was struggling to figure out, well, do I buy a pack of beans, or do I pay the electric bill? Should I put gas in the car? My son's got the sniffles. Do I get him some medicine? And I got this $10 and it's got to do 10 things for me for the next 30 days, and so that was what you call a personal crisis. It wasn't affecting everybody. In fact, it looked like it was only impacting me. But my world was coming to a complete and total halt, and it was crumbling fast. And all of the people kept saying, oh, go to this resource or go to that resource. They'll help you. They'll help you. Oh, you should be able to qualify for this. When you're in that, none of that works. None of it works. You go, you apply for this, and they say, oh, but you work. You just, it happened just 3 days ago. Why don't you just go apply for a job? Why don't you open a business? I mean, the blocks that just popped up time after time again, it was absurd. It was enough to make you go insane. So I applied for a job in North Carolina and they brought me on. And I thought, as I was driving on Sunday nights, every night I would leave my son in my home. It was extremely excruciating at midnight because I didn't want to leave him. So I would hold on to the very last minute and I would be admonishing him, if you're going to be here, baby, you don't want to go with your dad's house because they won't let you go to after school programs. But if you're going to be here, you can't go to sleep with the stove on, only microwave, please. And don't forget to lock the door. And it was like you're leaving. I could only imagine what our ancestors went through when their children were ripped from them, because although my circumstances were nothing like that, it was the most gut-wrenching and terrifying experience. But it was either that or lose everything. So I would get in the car and I would drive, and it was the most excruciating drive, weekend after weekend. And I would get there on Monday morning just in time to log into work, and nobody knew I was dealing with this. And so I would leave Sunday night, get there Monday, and then there was the issue, well, where in the world am I going to stay? Because nobody wanted to help me that I knew in North Carolina. And I had a girlfriend, and she slammed the door in my face, and she's like, no, I've got a man, you're not staying here. But what she did do was she gave me the phone number to a couple. Now, I was terrified. I had never stayed with anyone before. But the moment I walked into this couple's home, they were a Mormon couple. They were in Huntersville, North Carolina. And the moment I walked in, I was relieved because I knew it was going to be okay, that I was going to make it. So I walked in and there was my room and the bathroom and the kitchen. I didn't have to interact with anyone, just get in, get your rest and leave, right? And so one day I was in the laundry room, and above my head, I saw this box, and this box had the word emergency preparedness on it. And I was completely intrigued by that. I'd go on about my day. And then one day the lady who owned the home was there. And I said, Amberly, can you tell me what this means? Like, it just stayed with me all day. Like, what is this? I had never seen anything like that before. And she said, oh, that's my emergency preparedness box. And she's like, we're Mormon. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she's like, oh, well, we're Mormons. We have to be prepared for an emergency. And I was like, what do you mean? Come again. Like, I'm not making the connection. Explain a little bit for me. And she's like, okay, Sheila, we're Mormon. It's part of our religious beliefs that you have to have food, water, emergency supplies, and everything you need to sustain your family for 1 year at minimum in order to be a good Mormon.
Oh, okay.
And I'm saying to myself, wow, that is the bizarrest thing I have ever heard in my life. Certainly, I could see the benefit of all people in the world of having a little bit of beans, some water to drink, some emergency medicine for when my son decided, of all times, he never got sick, that he was going to catch the worst flu in Georgia. And it resonated with me because it made so much sense. If I had had a couple of cans of extra food or some dried beans or just, 3 months of food to sustain me instead of living day to day, week to week, and just taking for granted that I would always be able to go to the grocery store, I would always have what I needed. So that still unsettled my soul because I'm like, I'm hearing some new concepts that I never heard before. And any other time it would have just rolled off of my head. But here I am. I've been brought down to a complete state of emergency.
Mm.
I'm brought down to my knees. I literally had gone to a church and I was humiliated by this old woman who had blonde hair, and she was a part of this church, and she said, "What do you spend on groceries every week?" Now, I didn't have the sense enough to know that I didn't have a budget, so I gave her a number that she found completely offensive. And no one had taught me, even up to that point, about budgeting and finances. So what I really should have said to her was that over the course of a month, I might spend $400. And that would include not just groceries, but my laundry detergent and my detergents and my soaps and hygiene. But what I said to this lady was so offensive that she sent me packing. Like, oh, you live a luxurious lifestyle. I'm not giving you my church's money, and you need to grow some chickens. Chickens? Like, I was like, okay, Heavenly One, whatever I have done in this life to offend you, I'm asking for forgiveness because this is not okay. So I was being humiliated, having to be in the soup line, right? And I'm an attorney. And I'm like, why am I going through this? Well, sometimes you are brought down to such a low place because you will only see a lesson that is going to be put before you in a way that it will resonate with you and make sense in a way that you're supposed to act on and transform the way others are doing business if you were in this place. So had I been, having my money and my little car and all of my needs met, I would have never met Amberly.
That's right.
By no circumstances. I would have never been intrigued by the emergency essentials box, and I would have never had an opportunity to ask that question, and I would have never been confronted at a most pivotal time in my life with the reality of not being prepared. Because preparedness, you don't get caught up in whether it's apocalyptic level preparedness or if it's just a personal health crisis preparedness. Preparedness encompasses all of the potential scenarios. And I was certainly someone who was in no position to laugh at her seeing my predicament at the time. So I ended up leaving there, and eventually, ironically, as soon as I got that epiphany, everything seemed to fall back in order. I went back to Georgia. I ended up shifting my focus back to DC. I came back to DC, and here it was January the 23rd, in the middle of Snowmageddon, my son's birthday. He's turned 18 years old, and I'm over 300 pounds, and I'm miserable with life, and I had to confront all of that. And I'm saying to myself, what in the world was that about? Nawapia Nation, rejection, law school, Troy Anthony Davis. Is like your life flashing before your eyes. And then I start the journey, the real journey. I had been in hell, in purgatory, picking up all these lessons, gathering the jewels, because it was time for me to start building the castle. So the emergency preparedness came out of real lived experience. And it was followed up because once I got back to DC, I started really resonating on what was said. I started really paying attention to the unprecedented insight that I don't think very many Black women would get, to be in the home of a Mormon couple who was living this. See, what people don't know about the Mormons is they were and are the minority among the religious Western Anglo-Saxon Protestant theologies and Catholicism, the two. So they were the Negro of the white religious institutional system. So having that experience, they learned three very important things. One, that when it's time for scarcity of resources, the people on the bottom of the totem pole don't get fed, they get fed on. Two, regardless of how good a group of people are, no matter what their commonalities are, when it comes to the dire need for what Maslow referred to as the three hierarchy of needs, food, clothing, and shelter being the first run, your mother, neighbor, brother and sister become your chief and most prominent enemy. When hunger is on the table, the people who are closest to you are more of a threat to you than the people who are your institutional, theoretical, and ethnic enemy. Okay, you following me here?
Yes, very much
So
so.
this is why they incorporated into the religious doctrine, having endured at least 2 centuries of the brutalities of famine in this country, war in this country, and just religious unrest in this country. They had learned a few things, and they decided to incorporate. Now, can you imagine that every Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian, and non-denominational Black church adopting that type of mentality, that in order to be a good Christian, you have to have a certain level of knowledge about preparedness, about how to preserve water, how to store water, how to preserve food, how to organize ourselves around food, clothing, and shelter, so that in times of abundance, we incorporate this so intuitively and so innately in our life that it's second nature. When disaster happens, we don't even feel it. It's like a pinch on the skin. Whereas for everyone else, it turns into a full-fledged stab in the chest, right? And so can you imagine if that became a part of our theology?
We will be right back after
what
these
that would look like?
messages. Welcome back. Say, I've listened to your story, and it just evidence how God works in people's lives. And they're saying that, I'm not, quoting the Bible or religious books or anything like that, but some of those sayings are so powerful. And sometimes it's a saying that you have to go through the fire. Sometimes you will be tested, you will be tried. I'm talking about just not the average person. I'm talking about those who are called, what they would say in the religion. Those who are called, they say many are called, few are chosen. But even the chosen ones, only a few of them would get up and actually go. And it seemed like you one of those people that was called, that was chosen, but you did something. You went up and you went because you were so inquisitive enough. Not only in all of those journeys, that's what pulled you to all of them different things, and you were so inquisitive enough. You dwelt, like you said, you dwelt deeper than the average person would, and you experienced so much in life for such a short period of time in life. And it's not by what you heard; this is by experiences now. And you come full circle now, and after all that you've been through, a lot of people, and I'm being straight up about this, would have been more closed up. Me, myself, and our attitude. I'm in survival mode. It's all about me. And I'm not going to never go through this again. But no, you flipped it and turned it the other way around. You took those, even though sometimes they seem like it was punishment. Why me? Why I have to go through this? I ain't never hurt nobody, but yet I'm going through this and I'm going through that. But that's a simple, that now that I've been around for some time now, those people on a true mission have similar stories. And I relate those stories sometimes to those biblical books and stuff like that. When they was called, they had to go to a place they had no idea where they was going, how they was going to eat, how they was going to get there. But yet they had enough faith and to follow through. And when I hear your story, your stories of your journey, and it's such an amazing journey. But every step of the way, I noticed something. No matter what your situation was, you always had a heart to give and a heart to share. It wasn't all about you. So you was even concerned about your son. You was very concerned about the people, our people. You was concerned about this, and you did what you had to do. And you faced some, even though you tried to dot your I's and cross your, did all the right thing, you still had to face some atrocities and stuff. But now, today, and this is why I do interviews like this. Today, here you are, still practicing law. You now wrote a book to help people, how would you say, spiritually, financially, and everything a full circle now, even survival mode. You experiencing that. All of them things that you mentioned, yes, I can imagine if we, us black melanated people, picked up on those principles. We are powerful people, but with this wisdom and knowledge that you've been blessed with, it needs to be heard. And I'm so honored, and I'm being straight, I'm so honored to have this privilege to know your story. See, it's just confirmation for me that you have the gift and the tools and you're doing something about it, because there's a multitude of people out there who scratch and don't know how, and going through some of the things that you have been through. But they have no clue that there's no hope for them, and a lot of people are turning to other alternatives, drugs, even suicide, and everything else in between, because they can't find a way. But sometimes, now I always use this analogy about addictions. You can have all the education in the world. If you went to an AA program or an NA program, Narcotics Anonymous program, or Alcoholics Anonymous program, and you may have some people who went to school on these issues or diseases, and they would get in front of a room and explain what it does, this and do that. They may have some effect on some people. But until that person stands in front of that room who had life experience, who was addicted, who is addicted, and then altered and turned their life around, had 10, 15 years clean and stuff like that. When people hear that story, they recognize those stories because they lived them stories. And when they see somebody like that and they listen to them, that's what gets most people out of their situation, because they say, if he can do it, I can do it too. Because they know them stories. They know their pain. They know the hurt. And just listen to your story. I feel the pain. I could feel how you was lost, and sometimes you couldn't figure it out, and you did feel like you was being punished, and why me? Because I used to blame God. Why would you do this to a child? Why? Why would you take me to do it? Y'all talking about discrimination and people throwing stones at me just for going to school and stuff. Why, God? I used to blame. But in any case, now I understand why now. But say I can not just talk the talk, but say I lived it, I walked through it, and just hearing your story is so powerful. And I'm so pleased that you wrote this book, ladies and gentlemen. Whoever going to hear this, I strongly encourage you to pick up the phone, call this young lady, and even more important, pick up her book, buy her book, attend her lectures, invite her out to speak, because this is life altering. There it is right there. Divine.
The Divine Self-Care Strategy, a wellness guide to total body alignment. Don't be fooled by the title. This is loaded with ancient wisdom.
The title is loaded. and again, tell people how they can get in touch with you and explain a little bit more of the services that you provide.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say this when you were talking about the stories, and it reminded me of something when I asked to be helpful to my people, and the person I was speaking to, a wise ancient man, he said, "You sure about that?" And I said, "Yeah, I wanna be like you. I wanna make an impact in the world. I wanna be useful to my people. I wanna be useful." And he said, "Are you sure about that?" I said, "I'm sure." So "Okay." Said, "You're gonna have to apologize for something you haven't done. You're gonna have to do something that you won't apologize for." He says, "You're gonna have to carry a heavy rock that you cannot lift, and you're gonna have to lift a rock that you cannot carry."
Mm.
And then he said, "You're gonna have to take a long walk on a short path, and you're gonna have to walk a short path. I'm sorry, take a long walk on a short path and walk a short distance on a long path." And I was like, "That sounds easy."
Mm. Well, let me say this. In other words, there was a quote in the Bible. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know why it did, but I know now. It said, "Here I am, Lord, send me."
Hmm. Careful.
And, yeah, and I prayed that prayer one time, and that's why I tell people you better be careful what you ask for
You
sometimes.
better be careful
You,
what you
yeah, because
But the beautiful thing was that going through those schools, that would reveal to me the path, the purpose, and the means and the tools that I would need in order to accomplish the goals. So I think I went through all four of those schools and successfully overcame them. But it was a very powerful message that, I think had still resonates with me. Like, I'm still curious to know what is and what was the real lesson there, and I suspect I get it. But anyway, if someone wants to reach me to come and do a presentation, whether that is on the book, The Divine Self-Care Strategy, which is a powerful connection between freedom and health and how our ancestors strategically used the four elements, whether that's Frederick Douglass, the Honorable One, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Mother Harriet Tubman, Mother Harriet Jacobs, and some other ancestors whose names you may or may not know, how they laid a groundwork for us, how their speeches, their writings, their songs, their activities, their biographies contain a secret code, a secret message, metaphorically and literally, about how we can secure freedom and health now, how we did it then, and how we will probably continue to have to do it in the future. So that lays the groundwork for what I'm trying to teach our daughters about how to properly speak about, address, and tend to their sacred temple or their body. Very profound information in this book through what Dr. King referred to as the science of trans physics. It
mm,
is a must read. If you love history, if you love freedom, if you love health, you've got to read this book. Now, the other way I can help people, and I really need to be getting the word out more about this, is I teach an emergency preparedness course that's called Thrive in Emergencies, How to Thrive in Emergencies, Preparedness, Crises, and Disasters, right? And so that is a workshop that I'm teaching live, and I have a self-paced course that I'm developing that goes very in deep, answering questions like, what are the three threats to any water? How do you secure water in emergency situations? What are the sources of water? What are the three primary ways to treat water when water is questionable? What are the ways to properly secure and preserve food for 1 year to 25 years? What
mm.
is the difference between an emergency, a crisis, and a disaster? Why should you even care? What skills have we lost over time, and what should we continue to know? And more importantly, how to interpret the events that are unfolding today at a very rapid pace that look like food shortages, war, health crises, lockdowns, threats, and why you, of all people, need to have a language to be able to speak about these things intelligently, how to communicate them, and how to build community around like-minded individuals who will be able to survive these things. And then the final thing that I would like to offer is the opportunity to talk about my health and wellness journey using, again, our ancestors and their ways to conquer the unhealthy war that was waged against them through food, and what I call How to Overcome Emotional Eating in 21 Days, a Paradigm Shift. This is a course that I will be reinstating this year in the fall around October. It is a course to largely help women in all three of these things: emergency preparedness from the perspective of a thriving mindset, the divine self-care strategy, a wellness guide to total body alignment, and using the 4 elements to secure freedom and health then and now, and this relationship that we have with food and natural ways, plant-based ways, practical ways to detox your body periodically, your mind and your spirit, and engage the entire family doing it using the same resources: collard greens and watermelon, the 2 graces that the Most High gave our ancestors to combat a toxic diet of cornmeal, pork fat, and if they were lucky, molasses. There's a lot to unpack here, but I'm looking forward to doing it. Anyone who wants to reach me, you can call me at 301-388-5273. That's 301-388-5273. You can find me on social media at Sheila Brown Speaks or Queendom Care. That's QUEENDOMQARE. That's my brand. I am also accessible by email at info@SheilaBrownSpeaks.com.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's not only was a pleasure speaking with you, but it was so knowledgeable that I learned so much every time I hear you speak.
Thank you.
And I'm so grateful. And it's unfortunate you had to go through it, but it was for a reason. I'm grateful that you went through that journey because you came through it, you came out of it, and now you're here to teach us, to explain to us things that can alter our lives and our children's lives and our children's lives. The things that you went through. And so some people say, well, you have education or you have this or you don't have that. Uh, Her survival classes or something like that don't care when things hit you. Don't care what kind of education you have or anything else. When you come to when you don't have this and you don't have that, a lot of that can go out the window. So you need to learn techniques to survival. But most important, you need to learn who you are, what you're capable of doing. This young lady has so much information in so many different ways that can enhance your quality life, even help save your life. And so we appreciate you so much, and you can also find her on top of all the information you get in the National Black Unity News as well. We appreciate you so much, and you'll be hearing a lot from this young lady, and so prepare yourself, but even still, give her a call because the information that she has, the information that she's willing to share, is for us and it's by us. And I thank God again for her journey because, like I say, I consider myself a senior, but I'm always a student. And I've learned in this short period of time, knowing this young, I've learned so much. Things that you even make you question sometimes because I never thought about certain, I never just ran across my mind a case of disaster happen. Or, I heard people say this, this and this, that, but she brought it home that made a lot of sense to me. So I thank you for that. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is David Murphy and Miss Sheila Brown, and you will be hearing from the both of us. And so thank you, Sheila. Much love and respect. And had much respect for you. Thank you so much. Y'all take care.